שני המומחים שלנו, אחד איש המפלגה הדמוקרטית, או מקורב למפלגה הדמוקרטית, ואחד איש המפלגה הרפובליקנית, או מקורב למפלגה.
יש תרגום, אנחנו חייבים תמיד.
אוקיי, חשבתי שאני צועקת מספיק. אוקיי? ואנחנו נעשה את זה בצורה די לא פורמלית. זה אמנם לא אמריקאי לעשות את זה בצורה לא פורמלית, אבל אנחנו כאן במזרח התיכון עושים דברים ככה באופן חופשי, אז תרגישו שאתם יושבים בסלון שלנו באוניברסיטה הפתוחה, ואנחנו נשוחח על הנושא החשוב הזה. עכשיו, כמו שראיתם אתמול בניו יורק היה לנו פרומו לאירוע של היום, ואנחנו נדון גם במשמעויות של האירוע, אבל ננסה לצאת מהמקרה הפרטי ולראות אותו בהקשר יותר כללי. אנחנו נעשה את הדברים כך, אחרי שאני אסיים כאן, אנחנו נזמין את נציגת השגרירות האמריקנית, כאן, הייתה לפני דקה, מישל? אוקיי. כדי לברך בשם השגרירות. אחר כך אני אשב בין שני האדונים הנכבדים האלה. הם לא הולכים מכות בדרך כלל, ראיתי אותם לפני כמה שבועות, ונראה לי שכבר יש להם קרקס נודד ממקום למקום, הם כבר יודעים מה הם צריכים לעשות ולהתנהג יפה. מכל מקום, אנחנו נעשה את זה בצורה כזאת. אני אשאל אותם כמה שאלות, כל פעם אני אתן לשניהם את האפשרות להשיב, ואחר כך, אחרי שנגמור את הסט של השאלות האלה, אתם תוכלו לשאול שאלות שאתם רוצים, ויש לנו תרגום, אז מי שמכן לא יכול לעקוב אחרי האנגלית, יוכל לשמוע לאורך כל הדרך את הדיון בעברית, ואתם גם יכולים לשאול בעברית, ואנחנו נתרגם להם את זה מיד באנגלית, ככה שהתקשורת יכולה להיות מאוד חלקה בעניין הזה. אז לפני שאנחנו עוברים לחלק העיקרי של הערב, אני אבקש מישל קימבל גוזמן, was it okay? And she is the Deputy Cultural Attaché של ה-Embassy of the United States of America to say some words for us. Michelle, please.
לילה טוב ותודה רבה. אני אמשיך באנגלית, אבל אני מדבר קצת על עברית. I just want to thank all of you for coming here tonight. I think that this is a very interesting subject. Of course I do, I'm an American, but I'm very pleased to see how much interest there is around the world in the American presidential election. I know you know very well that we do this every 4 years, but this year is very distinct. And we have two really awesome speakers here who can talk about it. And of course, Professor Tamar Herman, who is going to moderate this panel, and I want to thank you very much for doing that. I also want to thank Open University for hosting this event, and especially Asaf Shambi. I don't know if he's here tonight, but he was very helpful to us in putting together the logistics for this event. Okay, thank you, sir. And with that, I will gladly leave the stage and turn it over to more capable hands.
So, my first question to you is a bit technical, okay? Assuming that one of the candidates quit for whatever reason at that stage, okay? What happens? Who is the candidate of either party?
Why would anyone quit?
Exactly.
Everyone's having so much fun.
Assuming that something, happens and...
it's a very unlikely scenario.
Martians are coming and kidnapping.
So, first of all, my understanding of it's a very technical question, as you say, and each party, I think, may handle it differently. It's a
Has it ever happened, Jay?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, I don't think it has ever happened.
I mean, I think it would probably go back to the DNC, but I don't envision that happening on either side. There was a lot of talk early on of
DNC
efforts to replace,
for our audience.
So the Democratic National Committee, in other words, the headquarters of the Democratic Party itself, which through a selection process nominated Secretary Clinton to be our nominee this cycle, and on the Republican side, the RNC, the Republican National Committee. Early on, there was talk as well. Is there a way to sort of make an end run on the convention, on all the voting that has already taken place in the primaries? At the end of the day, the selection has been made And these are the two candidates that I think are going to go to the end.
I have no idea what the mechanics are. Though I'm a Republican, a lifelong Republican, I'm not a supporter of Mr. Trump, so maybe I should look into it. But the truth is, I think the American political system is best served when the rules are simple and straightforward and followed. So should either candidate not be able to, for any reason, stand for election, the most logical thing to do would be for the next top vote getter from the primaries get that nomination. And that would be
this guy on the Republican side?
The Republican side, I believe it was Senator Cruz. And on the Democratic side, it was Senator Sanders. I mean, that would seem to me to be the most obvious solution,
but I think on the Democratic side, what ends up happening is that it actually the electors, the people who are selected, would then be free of their obligation to support the people that they pledged to support, and they would be free to choose a candidate.
And I think from a factual basis, that's true. I would just say that there would be a preference for something that appears to be fair. And any perception that the candidate is hand-chosen by a small group of people in the back room and not by the voters of that party would probably handicap and hamper that candidate. So, I mean, by the way, that being said, though, Senator Kaine, who is Secretary Clinton's running mate, might be a rational, reasonable choice. Vice President Biden might be a reasonable choice on the Democratic side. They might also be a reasonable choice on the Republican side. Right?
Saying the Republican side, almost anybody would be a reasonable choice by comparison.
Yeah. We'll see.
Oh, it's not really fair that the Democratic side to my left is much more, I would say, fond of the Democratic candidate rather than the Republican representative on my right.
I would not necessarily agree with that, but we could.
So you're fond of candidate Trump?
It's not just
Jay
me.
is.
Well, okay. So here's a very important distinction between what you think, what I think, and what the polls show.
Absolutely.
So what the polls show is that there's similar levels of intensity of hate and love in both sides.
So it's about emotions.
Of course.
It's absolutely about emotions.
Okay, so we will get to it later on. So my first real question to you is to what extent is it unique, this election campaign? Because everyone says that, we never experienced such a thing. And in the New York Review of Books, for example, I'm quoting Jonathan Friedlander, who just wrote last week, the usual rule book which the experts had studied and memorized seemed no longer to apply. Okay? Is it really a first for whatever? Have we ever experienced anything like that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, all right, the idea of first is not important. What's important is that Trump is, in specific ways, trying to rewrite the rules about how you run a political campaign and what it takes for a Republican candidate to win the presidency. Now, these rules are themselves temporary. Before 1988, the idea of blue states, red states, that states that are very Democratic, states that are very Republican, states that are in the middle, that wasn't really a feature of national elections. Yes, there were always states that tended to be Democratic, but that changed over time. The states that voted for Jimmy Carter, you'd have a hard time believing that some of those states are voted for a Democrat. Reagan won virtually every state. It's hard to believe that that a Republican presidential candidate won a state like California, or New York State, or New Jersey, or Rhode Island. I mean, Rhode Island. I grew up in Rhode Island. I mean, everybody's a Democrat. These rules are temporary. So what Trump has done is he's basically said, I am not going to live by the map that everybody tells me I have to live with. I'm going to be competitive in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Maine and other states that have voters that have traditionally not voted for Republicans. And you know, he could have a very compelling argument, and the polls show in those states that he's more competitive than Republicans have been in quite some time. He's also trying to rewrite the rules about how you run a campaign. So while Hillary Clinton is running a very, I think, what I would call a classic campaign of the last 25 years, very intensive on television advertising. She's done a lot of what they call micro-targeting, which means basically looking for small bits of the voters and targeting them with messages that is likely to excite them and make them actually vote. She's doing all these things, and she's doing them, I think, probably pretty well. Trump is, on the other hand, doing things that are actually more traditional. He's going and giving speeches to arenas with 10, 15,000 people at a time. And then he flies back home to New York. And then he goes back to a new city the next day and may do 2 events in a day. He's hardly spending any money on advertising. He's not doing any of the things that Barack Obama did in terms of data analytics. And so he's changing the way people like us, Jay and I are what I would call political professionals. We live in politics all the time. We thought that Barack Obama changed the nature of political campaigns, and what Donald Trump is doing is changing it again. And if he succeeds, we're going to have to rethink a lot of the things that we thought about how you run a national campaign.
So in a rare display of bipartisanship, I actually agree with Noam. And the answer he gave initially, yes and no. I mean, the country is still fundamentally split nearly down the middle. And at the end of the day, a small sliver, relatively small sliver of states, we call them swing states, those states that don't easily fall or predictably fall into categories of supporting Democratic candidates or Republican candidates. These are the ones that really will determine the fate of the next election. And the swing voters within those states are exactly the kind of people that both candidates are trying to reach and persuade. These are called persuadables, the ones who have not decided yet.
I thought they were called deplorables.
Just half of them, remember. You're going to joke.
Secretary Clinton, in a recent speech before her bout with pneumonia, she described Trump's voters, and she said half of them really have legitimate concerns about the economy, and they're concerned about this, and they're concerned about that. But the other half of them are a bucket of deplorables, or they say a basket of deplorables. A bucket בעברית. It sounds good, doesn't it? Yeah. So anyway,
She didn't say it in Hebrew, don't worry.
Yeah, she should have.
Suffice it to say, I think the Secretary is healthier than the Republican Party is right now. But we'll talk about that in a little bit.
That's a very bad case of pneumonia.
She apologized.
She did apologize. Yes.
So in many respects, it is a different kind of a campaign because we have a different kind of a candidate. On the Democratic side, we talk about the historic nature of Barack Obama. Clearly historic because of being the first African American to be elected president of the United States. Well, there is a historic nature of Hillary Clinton's candidacy as well, and I thought that was very poignant. Both of us are the fathers of 3 daughters, something else we share up there, and attending the convention and seeing the kind of attention and focus on the notion of breaking the glass ceiling in the United States, as your country did many years ago with Golda, and we've now seen 2 female prime ministers in the UK. We're finally getting around. So there are differences in this campaign cycle that make this election unique. There's no doubt that the candidacy of Trump is adding a tremendous amount of interest, almost like a car accident. But it is more interesting to many people, not just at home, but abroad. We both travel a fair amount, and I know I'm always asked, I'm sure you are too, what is happening in your country? Is this really possible? So it's definitely a different kind of campaign.
I mean, it raises what Jay points out is a serious question. There's a lot of people have a hard time understanding Trump, or I should say they have a hard time understanding why people like Trump. And I, as somebody who worked very hard for Jeb Bush to try to get Jeb Bush nominated as the president, and therefore I worked very hard against Donald Trump, I can tell you that I struggled with some of this myself. So it's worth the effort to try to understand why people are supporting Trump, and I think that that it will tell you a lot about America and where America is right now. To understand Trump's appeal is to understand the disappointment that many Americans feel about America's economy, about America's institutions, certainly the federal government and Congress, and whether the government works on behalf of the people or just works on behalf of special interests. There's a lot of disappointment in large institutions like big corporations and the media, and in things like the Department of Veterans Affairs. There's been a sense of abandonment among many Americans. And what Trump has tapped into is that sense of abandonment and disappointment and anger. And even if you think Trump is off the wall, and I tend to think that, he has figured something out in the way he talks, in the issues he chooses to talk about, that resonate, that really hit people, in the kishkas. And even if you hate Trump, you have to try to understand that appeal, because if he wins, and that's a separate issue. But if he loses, those people are still there, and there are millions of them.
We will come to that issue. What happens if, as political experts, would you say that he projects the sense that he doesn't listen to experts, that he does it intuitively, whereas Hillary Clinton projects the sense that she's actually a captive audience of her advisors? I mean, does this interfere with her ability to project sincerity, to project, unlike Trump, who seems to be saying whatever his, as you said, kishkas tell him.
Trump seems to listen only to Trump. I mean, he said that when asked about his advisors.
But does he really?
Well, he
or is
seems
it a
to,
very sophisticated way of
listen,
packaging?
In my view, first of all, it is sophisticated. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly to whom he is speaking, who his audience is, and it's in my view, a very cynical ploy that he's using to first of all attract supporters and then to keep them, right? He's in a sense, we look at this guy as being erratic, and he is at times.
Does he know what ELPO is?
But well, in that sense, I don't know. It's a good question, but try and get him to answer the question. You can't really pin the guy down, right? He's on every side of every issue. On the one hand, on the other hand, he seems to have tremendous discipline, which is why he was able to defeat Jeb and all these other traditional candidates, right? He knows how to seize that issue of immigration and consistently beat at that issue, which provided at least a consistent base of support that got him through the primaries and allowed him to become the nominee. Hillary had some traction issues early on, right? First of all, it's hard to fight this notion that she was the heir apparent. I think she learned many things in 2008, that this notion of talking about experience, not really attractive. I mean, it didn't really work against a candidate like Barack Obama. Saying, hey, it's my turn. I waited patiently in the wings, and I was a loyal foot soldier and served the president with great, loyalty and so forth, was not a message that was going to resonate with voters, right? Nobody likes a coronation, especially in our party.
The Clinton family and loyalty is a complicated issue.
Perhaps, but we're talking not about the family, we're talking just about the candidate right now. And the candidate herself understood that she really had to earn the vote of every primary voter in the party. And to do that, she really had to sort of let people into who she really was. And so, yes, there are every candidate and campaign is filled with people telling a candidate how to dress, how to walk, how to talk, what to say. I was a candidate for Congress. If I listened to every campaign consultant's advice, I probably wouldn't recognize myself in the mirror. At the end of the day, she had to come out and say, in a sense, in a very real sense, you know what, I understand that I'm not warm and fuzzy. I don't have that ability, that natural ability that my husband, Bill Clinton, has, or Barack Obama has, to connect with people. But here's who I really am. Here are the issues that motivate me. Here are the things that I have worked on for the last 30 or 40 years that I care deeply and passionately about. Here's a record that I have, which Mr. Trump doesn't have, not just in elected office as a senator, but as a secretary, as a first lady, as the first lady of Arkansas, before that, as an attorney, as a human rights and civil rights activist, as a women's rights activist. And it's fairly consistent. You can see that and you can judge it, whether you appreciate it, agree with it, disagree with it. There's a track record there. And I think it's been a process for her, even though she was a candidate last time around. I think she had to learn a lot of these things. And I think she's at a point now where she can really sort of be herself on the campaign trail.
I mean, the great irony on this is that that Hillary has been tagged by Trump and her other critics as establishment, manufactured, controlled, not authentic, not strong, and yet she has always struggled to try to convey that she is warmer than she really is, or I should say she's warmer than she appears to be. It's almost like if she had always been the tough, if you can excuse the term in English, the tough broad. You know, the tough broad, there's a type of person that we all know, the tough broad, and you know, sometimes the tough broad rubs people the wrong way, and there's a term for that, which I won't say. But the tough broad also is like Maggie Thatcher. You know, says what's on her mind. And you know, and I wonder whether Hillary has made a miscalculation in taking so long to get there, and I'm not even sure she's there. Meanwhile, she's running up against the opposite of the tough broad. Well, and there's another word for that, which I won't say. And you know, he has. Look, I mean, if you were running for president as an outsider, as a change candidate, as somebody who's not like all the other schlubs who have been running this country into the ground, the one thing you would definitely not do is say, oh, but I have all these great advisors. You would say, I have no advisors. I don't need advisors. The advisors are the people who got us into this trouble in the first place. Even though that is ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous to think that somebody could be president without advisors, without support, without people who know the issues, who know how to run an army, who know how to run a government. It's ridiculous. But from a campaign point of view, and from the point of view of speaking to your voters that you want to attract, it is absolutely the right thing to say and do, strategically.
But who does he listen to, really?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, you know, he's
his son-in-law.
Who knows?
For example?
I don't know.
You know,
I don't know. I don't know. Look, I mean, I'm telling you that Donald Trump projects the idea that he keeps very, very few people around him that he listens to, if any, and that's all we know. And you know, and you can listen to any number of people who can tell you what they think. I mean, look, I mean, Jay and I will tell you the same thing. You do not know what these candidates are really like unless you actually know who they are and you get to know them yourself personally, and that is why I'm very reluctant to conclude anything about them on these kinds of conversations. Right,
audiences. Who is the classical audience right now of Donald Trump? Not necessarily the Republican Party in general. Who is going to vote for Donald Trump?
Well, the people who I described before who are very concerned about a number of things. Let's say they're concerned about general sense that they've been left behind by America's economy. And these would be people who don't live in the wealthy coasts or in the cities.
Rust Belt?
The Rust Belt, but you know, the Farm Belt, just away from the cities. You know, instead of Palo Alto, California, they live in Fresno. Instead of Atlanta, they live in southern Georgia. You know, not in the cities, not near the universities, not near the big corporations. They're just away. So those people. Then there are the people who feel that America's pride has been degraded by, you know, Barack Obama, or even by Barack Obama and George W. Bush. I mean, you know, there are a lot of military families who have seen their sons and some daughters come back with, you know, missing a leg or missing two legs or coming back in a box, and they ask themselves, why have we been supporting these guys who keep sending our children off to war, and then they don't commit fully to seeing the mission through. People who feel that the Republican Party talks a big game about opportunity and they don't provide it. Security, they don't do it. Or, by the way, Democrats. You know, Democrats who may have voted for Reagan but hadn't voted for a Republican since. Trump's trying to bring them back in. People who have never voted before. People who have been frustrated and just felt like the whole political system was a disgrace. But they say, this Trump guy, he will shake it up.
Some laborers, by the way, as well. Even though labor is a traditionally Democratic constituency, core constituency, many are really ticked off, upset about a lot of the trade deals. And you know, Trump has tapped into this anger and sense of disappointment and betrayal as well. So he is really trying to cut into at least one core Democratic constituency. He seems to have offended and alienated almost every other. But again, he's not going to necessarily get those voters, and it seems to have brought out new voters to support him in the primaries. Let's see if they, you know, continue when it comes to a general election.
Yeah. What about the younger age cohort?
Younger age voters so far are overwhelmingly supporting Hillary. Well, but younger voters don't vote in the kinds of numbers that they should be voting in. Yeah. You know, seniors vote in tremendous numbers. American Jews vote in tremendous numbers, but we're so small that it really doesn't have much of an impact. It could in certain places, in certain swing states, because we tend to have larger concentrations of our community in those places like Florida, like Ohio, and so forth. So, and we vote in higher numbers than any other ethnic minority. So our turnout gives us disproportionate power compared to our numbers. You know, she'll motivate the core Democratic base. Women are certainly motivated to support her. She's got an overwhelming advantage. And if she didn't before, every time Trump opens his mouth and says something disparaging about women, it just drives more and more women to support her as well. So he's actually helping in that regard. Hispanics, we've always had an advantage there.
African Americans?
African Americans for sure, even though she seemed to be initially underperforming compared to Barack Obama, which is not necessarily surprising. Her husband is still enormously popular within the African American community, and let's not forget that the two best assets right now in that community, and not just that community, but especially the African American community, is the President of the United States and the First Lady. President's popularity rating overall right now is at 58%, so that should really help lift her among many core constituencies.
Yeah, I will say, just you asked about young voters, they're clearly not as enthusiastic about Clinton as they were about Obama. And it's important to say that because their turnout in the 2012 election in particular was critical for Obama to win re-election. I mean, he created significant new voters in that election. And by the way, so though Hillary, I think, is going to win that cohort by 20, 30 points, I mean, a huge range, the key is whether they come out and vote for her. As a Republican who's thinking about, you know, the next election after that, what Obama has done with young voters, combined with the way that Trump has turned them off, has been a disaster. Because this generation, the millennials, which is the largest generation of Americans ever born, is overwhelmingly liberal, overwhelmingly democratic. Overwhelmingly open to ideas that I would call neo-socialistic. You know, the idea of free college and free this and free that. So either they will wake up one day and see the wisdom of their elders, and we know how long that can take, or they are going to be Democrats for the rest of their lives until they maybe have a mortgage or something like that. So you know, some of these issues are issues for this election, but many of these issues are issues forever, or at least for the next 50 years.
What about the American Muslim community? Does it have any voice in this election campaign?
It has a voice, but it is not, first of all, well organized. Politically speaking, it doesn't have a history of political activism and involvement. It doesn't contribute in the way other communities, whether it be American Jews or Latinos or Asians, contribute. In other words, they, as a community, as a bloc, it's not monolithic. I mean, there are, believe it or not, some American Muslims who will vote for Donald Trump, just like there are some Latinos who will vote for Donald Trump. They don't yet they haven't sort of found that magic sauce that American Jews understood. I mean, 70 years ago, we were powerless. We didn't have the political power that we wield today. We didn't contribute to campaigns. We sort of laid low, flew under the radar screen, and, you know, did our work, but we weren't involved politically. And, you know, we were turned away at the gates of the White House when a group of very, very senior influential rabbis tried to meet with President Roosevelt to plead with him to intervene on behalf of the Jews of Europe. Well, that was a very telling and important lesson for the community as a whole, and a lot of the organizations that you see today were formed in the aftermath of World War II, and I think it accounts for why you see our parents' and grandparents' generation becoming politically involved. If you look at almost any political campaign, whether it's for school board in some small city in, you know, Nebraska, to these current races for president of the United States, you always find a wealth of Jewish volunteers, advisors, contributors, for sure. And you see it to the degree that you don't necessarily see in other communities, necessarily American Muslim communities, one of them. And I'd say, broadly speaking, the Arab American community, which again is splintered. It's not unified. There are Lebanese who differ from Palestinians, who differ from
Syrians,
Iraqis, and Syrians and so forth. So there's no defined monolithic
And the
block.
evangelists?
Evangelists are very powerful. That's more in his terrain,
Well,
although...
I'm going to change the term, evangelicals. Evangelists are the people who stand on stage.
Right, who stand there. But evangelicals, by the way, if you look back, I mean, it's not, I mean, today they're much more squarely in the Republican camp, but remember in 1992, Bill Clinton actually did quite well with the evangelical voters.
Yeah, the evangelical vote, broadly speaking, I would call the religious vote.
Christian religious vote.
Yeah, well, there's also traditional Catholic, which is different than non-traditional Catholic. They follow a pattern that the more religious you are, the more likely you are to go to church or shul, or, you know, they don't say shul, but you know what I'm saying. The more likely you are to vote Republican. And by the way, that's
For Jews too.
For Jews too, yeah. I'm pretty sure the only religious group that's doesn't follow that pattern are the Muslims, which is interesting. But the evangelical vote is very squarely, as Jay says, in the Republican side, but it is not as politically attuned as, for sure, the Jewish vote. They still underperform in terms of their numbers. I remember when I was in the White House before the 2004 election. You know, I know that our political team was focused on the fact that in Ohio in 2000, there were several 100,000 evangelical voters who did not vote like we thought they would. And so one of our goals was to turn them out, and we did. And I know it surprised the Kerry team how many new voters we had discovered. And that level of surprise always hits the losing campaign. Always. They suddenly stunned. We didn't know these people existed.
And the morning after sucks, right?
Yeah, that too. Yeah, that's the other part that you notice. So, but by the way, they're not going to be reliable necessarily as Republican voters. It's actually one of the areas that Trump has actually. This was very surprising to me throughout the Republican primaries. That despite the fact that Trump is married 3 times, not at the same time, but you know. That he has
might appeal to Muslim voters.
He's come on, you know that he is a less than
Serial monogamist.
He's a serial monogamist. He's a serial something or another. He has his personal record is not one that evangelicals typically admire. I'll leave it at that. And yet he was able to convince a significant share of them. I mean, not always, he wasn't their first choice, but he was always like their number 2 or number 3 choice. And what he was saying to them is, you are trusting the wrong politicians to have your back, to defend your interests. I will defend you. And you have to remember that when you feel that your culture is under attack, you don't really care who defends you, you just want to be defended. And so for Trump was able to, and this is the reason why all of his things that he says that might be offensive to you or might seem a little edgy, you have to listen to it with the ears of somebody who feels that their way of life is under attack, and they're thinking, you know, these people that we keep sending to Washington are supposed to defend me. They're doing a lousy job. I'm willing to go with that guy over there. And you know, Trump is like, you know, the Joker in a card deck. You know, you're playing the cards, you got your jacks, you got your threes, you got your twos, you got your kings, your aces, and suddenly the Joker comes out and everyone's like, what do we do now? And that's the thing, everyone's wondering, what do you do now?
Let's talk about the media. The role of the media, media images, traditional media, TV, newspapers, as opposed to the new social media. What role do they play in this election campaign? In which way is it? Media, I asked about the media, to which extent the traditional media, like TV, printed press, and so on and so forth, as opposed to the social media, the new social media. How did they help, or do they help, or not helping each of the two candidates? Because there is lots to say about it. Hillary vis-a-vis the...
So I'll talk about social media first. I think it's an area where the Democrats have had a significant advantage. I think if you look back at 2008 and 2012, one of the things that really distinguished the Obama campaign from their Republican counterparts was their ability to really utilize social media in a very smart way, in a way that campaigns hadn't used them before, and again, to take advantage of the data analytics and to go really in a very targeted way after very specific audiences with very specific messages. And that's, of course, something you can do with social media as opposed to mass media. The role of mass media, you know, I never think it's helpful, we've talked about this, to blame the mass media, but I gotta say, I think, you know, as a Democrat looking at the Republican race, I think early on, they pretty much gave Donald Trump a free pass, and to a degree are still doing that.
$5 billion worth of free coverage.
Yeah, now he didn't have to spend a cent of his money. It's all earned media, which is a terrific strategy. You don't want to, you know, spend your money until the final weeks of a campaign, when you need to sort of figure out again where those final ads need to go up on television to try and persuade people. And I can't blame the media entirely, because I don't think anyone really took Trump seriously. I don't think Trump took Trump seriously until he realized, wow, these other guys are falling by the wayside. I may be the last man standing. I might be able to do this. And then it sort of sunk in. Now, with that said, you know, you're seeing a situation where, and again, it is never a winning strategy for a candidate to say, it's not my fault, it's the media's fault. But all the focus and attention on Hillary, rightly or wrongly, on a health issue. Has Donald Trump released his medical records, even though he says he will? Has Donald Trump released his tax returns, which he continues to say he won't do? I mean, there are so many areas where, you know, you look at the Matt Lauer, there was a candidate's forum, really. It really wasn't much of a debate, but they pressed Hillary pretty hard. Pardon? Yeah, were on emails and sort of, you know, the scandal part of this campaign. And yet Donald Trump came up there. He was asked questions, didn't really answer those questions, was not really pushed or pressed or prodded to stick to the questions that were asked. And he got a sort of a free pass. It remains to be seen if that happens at the debates. If the moderators, who are really carefully selected, are really going to be tough on both candidates, by the way. I'm not suggesting that either candidate should get a pass. This is the top job in, you know, a very complicated time for our world, for our country. They should be able to answer the tough questions right now, but you got to pose tough questions for them and hold their feet to the flame and make sure they actually answer them. So I think the press has actually added to, I think they've been enamored with this novelty. They've enjoyed a lot of the increased ad revenues from additional eyeballs that traditional media hasn't really seen. They've lost a lot to social media, et cetera, and they've been willing participants to go along on this crazy ride this campaign season. Let's see if they take a more traditional role in the final days.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things to keep in mind is that in the United States now, especially in younger voters, they get almost all of their news from what I would call non-traditional media. So not newspapers, but maybe newspaper websites, but only usually through Facebook and Twitter and maybe some occasional other sites.
Or Comedy Central, too.
Well, and they get a lot of their news from non-news sources, such as comedy shows. So what's happened is when you read, when you see headlines and you don't even read the stories, or you just of stories that your friends are sharing around, imagine what would happen. Well, you already know. I mean, what happens is that it becomes a self-affirming cycle. You start to only be aware of the points of view of people with whom you already agree. And so unless you're willing to be uncomfortable when you open your Facebook feed or your Twitter feed to see stories that you actually disagree with or you're sort of profoundly offended by, things like that. So what's happening is that media is becoming sort of like an engine, like a dynamo for more partisanship, more one-sided views. And it makes it very hard for people like, well, Jay and I talk to each other about politics and policy all the time, and we get along great. But it makes it much harder for people to have those conversations, which is bad on many levels for American democracy as a whole, and any kind of Western democracy. But it makes it.
You're familiar with.
Yeah, so you're familiar. Yeah. But it makes it especially hard to actually understand what's happening in the minds of people with whom you disagree. And that's why I urge you, if you are a big Hillary person, you should try to understand what the Trump people are saying. And if you're a big Trump person, you should try to understand what the Clinton people are saying. And that doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but you have to try to expose yourself to it, even to the point of discomfort. Because if you don't understand what those other perspectives, you can't possibly win those people over.
Now let's touch upon the very sensitive issue of gender. To which extent gender plays a role in this campaign? Was Hillary Clinton treated differently because she's a woman, an older woman? Image, health, weakness, all these issues that come together. Once she feels bad, it's immediately connected to her being a woman. Can women be strong enough in order to function properly as the President of the United States, and so on and so on?
I'll make 2 points on this. The first is without a doubt, Hillary Clinton being the first woman to stand for the presidency has become an issue. And she wanted it to be that way because she made it that way. She probably didn't anticipate that there is a level of discrimination. It might be actual, it might be subtle, but there is definitely, Americans are not necessarily used to having a woman as president because it's never happened before. So she said, I want to break through that glass ceiling. I want to, as a woman, this is something I can bring a new perspective and new ability to the job. She said that.
Did she bring another voice?
Well, she said that too. She said a new perspective.
No, not saying it, but is her message in any way different because of her gender? Because, sometimes this plays, it's a double-edged sword. If you say it, but then your message doesn't have any
That's
gender.
That's a good point. Yeah, I haven't thought about whether she's really. See, I don't know what that means. I mean,
we are in the university. We talk about.
Yeah, I know you talk about that, but actually,
it comes out in priorities, just in the way So for example, first of all, I do think yes, she did anticipate this. I don't think she thought for a minute that she would necessarily would be treated fairly, or that there wouldn't be a different standard. She did expect
to be an
it.
advantage.
Not necessarily an advantage. Well, I think she understood that she was going to be treated differently. In certain circles, in certain venues and places, it might be an advantage. In other places, it would be a distinct disadvantage. And, you and I have had a lot of events. I've been asked already, without naming names or places or locales, who's advising Hillary? And I'm trying to think in my head, okay, let's see, is this going to be a foreign policy, domestic policy question? Who advises Hillary on what she wears? Yeah. And I said to this man, would you ask me that if the nominee of my party was a male and not a female? And he said, well, yes, yes I would, but I'm not sure that's true. I'm really not sure that's true. And, again, a guy shows up in a suit. Maybe he looks good, maybe he doesn't. But I wouldn't think of looking at Hillary. I mean, it just doesn't cross. And yet, it's nothing new. When I worked in the White House, every time Hillary changed her hairdo, there was, the frustration that there would be far more stories about the change in her hairdo than about the healthcare reform she was trying to enact. And so, I mean, she definitely expected it. And there's no doubt there has been a double standard. And there's no doubt in my mind that she does bring a different voice. Again, not necessarily better or worse, but a different voice to the passion that she has for the issues that she cares about. Absolutely.
And I certainly agree that the images of her, fainting hurt her in particular because people don't think of older women as strong and vibrant and virile and energetic. It's unfair. I know many who are. My mother is certainly one, and she will remind me of that all the time. But it is something that lies. If your university-trained mind will appreciate this, lies slightly in the subconscious. The children's stories we read have certain heroes. Very, very rarely is the old woman the hero.
Absolutely.
And it's perhaps not fair.
Some Disney movies now.
Some
There's
Disney
a
movies,
heroine.
that's true.
Fair.
Life isn't fair, but the important thing here is that in a campaign, we talked about emotion. It's an emotional campaign. People are thinking deep, deep thoughts, and it's not with their brain; it's with their gut. And so when they see something that makes them feel something emotional, they'll come up with the rationale later, but they've already reached the conclusion. So they might have already reached the conclusion on Hillary, even if they don't say this, they've already reached the conclusion that she's weak, that she's not going to be a healthy president. And that means that they will not support her.
And the optics of yesterday just feed into that and add legitimacy to that.
That's exactly.
Look at all the focus and attention even during, the primaries, right? If Donald Trump yells something, oh, he's strong, he's resolute, etc. They don't spend the time, or at least they didn't spend the time, the commentators, analysts, etc., focusing on the tonal differences between the candidates. On Hillary, she's a bit shrill, right? It's not that she was strongly, passionately coming out in support of or against a particular initiative, or she's shrill. Maybe she should, tone it down a bit. But she's too quiet. She's too meek. She's too weak. So, definitely a different standard being applied, for sure.
Is it true that there is some problem there with young Democrat women that are not very much supportive of Hillary?
Not that I've seen. I mean, again, I can just do this anecdotally. Having attended the convention, I think if there's any constituency that is, I would suggest potentially maybe older females. There may be, but younger women seem to be extraordinarily supportive. And again, if
how do your daughters feel about Hillary?
Oh, they love Hillary. Yeah, I'll tell you an anecdote. So, my oldest daughter Yarden, who's 11, has met Bill Clinton, has met Barack Obama. My middle daughter, who's 8, went with me to the White House Hanukkah party, was delighted to meet Obama, and I do them one year at a time. My 6-year-old, Sienna, who's in first grade, I said, this year you get to go to the White House Hanukkah party and meet President Obama. And she said, I don't want to meet Obama, I want to meet Hillary. So there's a young future Democrat, I hope.
She's smart.
Mizrat Hashem.
She's investing in the future. Yeah.
There you go, exactly.
Right. So now, assuming that Donald Trump is elected, what would be his first steps? What would he do in his first year in term?
Probably sell the rights to the White House briefing room, right? I mean, this is...
he wouldn't sell it. He would just put Trump.
Exactly.
I don't know. I mean, so I'm going to give a serious answer to a serious question. And I'm going to start it by saying I don't know. Because I don't. I don't.
Does he know?
Oh, I'm sure he has some ideas.
Okay.
I would suspect that one of the first things that he would do that he could control would be to focus on immigration. what he would do is a good question because his views have very subtly changed. He seems to be softening on certain things. But he's going to focus very much on the one thing that distinguished himself from the other candidates. Again, that's what I would assume he would do, but I've often been proven wrong about what he would do. I don't know. I mean, look, he's going to have to deal with certain things. I mean, I think whoever's the next president is going to have to deal with some issues on domestic policies such as healthcare. There's some real issues with our healthcare system. Our job market is okay, but not that great, and he may want to focus a little on that. He may want to do something big on infrastructure, highways and trains and pipelines. But fundamentally, I think he's probably, if he wins, what will have happened will be there will be significant new Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, because the only way that he wins is if a lot of new voters come out and support him, and that presumably they would also support the Republican candidates who are running in other races, and so he would have a lot of room to run. He would have a significant ability to govern if he wanted to govern, and I suspect that immigration would be the first step.
What about foreign policy? What would be his balance between domestic and foreign policy?
Again, this is tricky. I mean, he's broken with the Republican, convention on foreign policy on so many fronts. So I don't know. I think that he would not be interested in any new, major diplomatic overtures or trade agreements or anything like that. I think he would try. He says he would renegotiate NAFTA. I don't even know how you renegotiate NAFTA, but NAFTA is the big free trade agreement for North America. I don't think he would do certain things with traditional alliances. For example, I don't think that he would try to do anything with the U.S.-Israel relationship.
That's the next question.
Oh, okay, we'll let you save that. Yeah, well, we should ask about Hillary. I think that he would. He seems to admire Putin, and I think what Putin's foreign policy is actually, and Putin's leadership style is to be bellicose when it's easy. So if you're going to follow that approach, Trump would look for easy fights to have. So that would mean not taking on Syria or Iran or anything that's really very challenging, but he would pick on some small country or some small terrorist group, and he would just try to destroy them. Something like that.
And
so
Hillary?
technical question, since you started this conversation. If he wins, what are the technical procedures for making Aliyah? Because I think you're going to have... You can ask Mike Ranoff over here, right? Okay. So
that's wonderful. We had the French Jews coming from France, then we'll have Americans.
Make way for the Americans.
Oh, wait, every time people say that, it's an interesting thing. Every time people say, if Trump wins, I'm going to leave the country. It actually it's a really bad thing to say.
Yeah. It's not going to happen.
Right. First of all, it's not going to happen. Second of all, because it actually undermines the idea that people who oppose Trump love America, which is a really bad thing. I always say to my daughters who are very much in favor of Clinton, they say, if Trump wins, will we leave? I said, no, this is our country, and we're going to stay here.
But your daughters are saying that, which is something my daughters say too, which that fear and that sense of what happens if he wins is out there. The Canadians fear it as well. They're talking about building a wall in the north for science. So what would Clinton do? There's a book from a political science. We're in an academic environment. A book that I read in political science at UCLA about 30 years ago called Crusaders and Pragmatists, and it sort of divided presidents and leaders into those two categories. Pardon? I'm not sure if they heard the Crusaders and Pragmatists is this book. So, it seems to me, and again, I don't work for Hillary. I'm not on her campaign. I am a supporter. I'm on the finance team and so forth. But important to say that neither one of us are representing any candidate or anyone else other than ourselves here, not the embassy for sure. You have capable representatives here on their own. Again, it's guesswork. The truth is, you said before, you don't know. I don't know what Hillary would do. I would assume that she would be very pragmatic, especially in those first 100 days. I would assume that she would try and fulfill part of what her campaign theme is right now, which is coming together, bringing people together. This is a very divisive campaign.
Like healing procedure?
Something, I mean, in a sense, some way to appeal to those who didn't support her, which is going to be difficult because the intensity of the emotions are very, very high on both sides. But I think she would try and find a way, some issue in commonality, some way to tone down the rhetoric and to bring people together. And you have a honeymoon. It may be shorter than it was when we worked in the White House, but you do have this period right after the president is elected. You have a transition period, first of all, but then you have usually, historically, 100 days. It's probably shorter now. But you have some time to set out... Exactly.
100 seconds, yeah.
Exactly. To set out your agenda. And, a lot of it, I think, mostly would be focused on domestic kinds of issues, jobs, addressing the economic fears, the concerns of people, maybe something with students, Infrastructure would be great because, again, infrastructure, the dilapidated infrastructure is a bipartisan issue. How to fund it may be a different story, but everyone agrees that the bridges, the roads, et cetera, are crumbling, and that would be a great job creator as well.
On foreign policy, one thing to keep in mind is that it actually doesn't matter what the candidates say right now. And we know this from the past. I mean,
no one could have predicted 9/11.
George W. Bush ran as a relatively restrained president when it came to foreign engagement. And 9 months later, 9/11 happens, and suddenly he's the most internationalist president.
Barack Obama in Guantanamo?
Exactly.
Right.
Obama made a very big promise on emptying out Guantanamo, and it turns out it's still closed.
He's trying in the last few months.
Yeah, he's
that
trying
promise.
best.
Right.
Clinton, too. Clinton was very critical of the North American Free Trade Agreement, and then when he comes into the presidency, he supports it and actively implements it very, very actually effectively. So he went from anti-free trade to pro-free trade.
Right.
And so the candidates can say what they want to say, but events take over once they're in the
Well, and especially in foreign policy, it tends to be much more reactive. I think every president has tried to stay away from the Middle East to a degree. I don't think anyone rushes in saying, wow, I can't wait to be president so I can go make peace. They try and avoid it like the plague, but events overtake that and usually pull them back into playing a role that we've traditionally played in the past. So, hard to say what she would do with any great specificity, but I think she would focus on something domestic and something more touchy-feely to try and heal the country after the elections.
Right. So now we get to the really important question. U.S.-Israel relations.
Is it good for the
Jews? I thought it was going to be a question from the audience. The U.S.-Israel relationship.
Yeah, we had a survey last week, and apparently all Israelis, or the majority of Israelis, think that Hillary is going to win the elections. However, they think that Trump is better for Israel. Okay?
What was the number?
Yeah, what was the margin
numbers?
here?
I'll show you the numbers later on, but there was a majority in favor of Hillary, not the huge majority in terms of the expectations.
Of winning.
Of winning.
Okay.
But Trump would be better. By the way, there is a very, very active Trump, I would say, branch in the West Bank.
Yep.
By the way, very, very active, much more than Hillary's
Trump's,
support base.
And it's funny because Trump has terrible field operations in the United States.
But very good at the West Bank.
I kid you not. I kid you not. There's a state, Colorado. Colorado is a very important state. Usually, swings with it's a swing state. And there's a county in Colorado called Jefferson County, which is a swing county in a swing state. So it's a very important, small county. And the Trump field office is led by a 12-year-old boy. He's a volunteer. This is insane. I mean, this is when I said, Trump is running a non-conventional campaign. This is exactly what I'm talking about. That would even happen is insane.
That's just ridiculous.
So the West Bank operation evidently is the Trump is like the cream de la creme, So.
Yeah.
So what would they do? I mean, if he's elected or she's elected, are they going to get messed up are they going to get messed up in this godforsaken part of the world?
So, again, I don't think it's the first issue on anyone's agenda. With that said, I think the secretary will do something that is reflective of who she is and where she has been on
Clinton
this
parameters?
issue. No. First of all, they refer to her husband, not her.
Of course.
Number one. Number two, I think she will, if she does anything related to Israel early on, I think she will make an effort to reach out to, on two levels. One, to the Prime Minister of Israel, and two, to the people of Israel. And that will be to reassure, to remind them of the kind of support that she's provided as a senator, the kind of support that she provided when she was Secretary of State. I don't expect there to be any surprises. I think, again, she's very pragmatic, very understanding of the importance of this relationship, of rebuilding frayed edges. I mean, I think that the relationship is solid. We don't have to, gloss over necessarily that the leaders of both the United States and Israel probably aren't the best of friends. It's an understatement. And yet the relationship endures as this president, who is often accused of not being a good friend of Israel, is about to sign the single largest military aid package to the state of Israel, the largest my country has ever signed and the largest your country has ever received. And if you talk certainly to military and intelligence leaders in the United States and the many in Israel that I've spoken to and consulted with, have provided someone like me who cares deeply about this relationship with the reassurance that the last 8 years, again, despite tonal differences at the top, they've experienced the best coordination, cooperation between our two countries ever in the history of the relationship. And that, again, that is very comforting. I believe, though, that she will do what she can on the tonal level to reestablish a better relationship, a more working relationship, a more cordial relationship with the Prime Minister. And again, they don't always see eye to eye. They know each other for many, many years, and that, I mean, the fact that they've known each other, I think, is actually a positive thing. They understand how far each can be pushed. They understand red lines. They understand the limitations based on their own domestic situation. She has core constituencies that she doesn't necessarily want to cross. So does the Prime Minister of Israel, right? These are not kingdoms. It may look like it in certain respects, in certain places, at certain times, but they're not kingdoms, and they all have constituencies that they have to be responsive to. So I think she would take steps, perhaps, within the first, the early period, to provide some reassurance to the Prime Minister and to the rest of the government of Israel, but also to the people of Israel. I'm your friend. I've been your friend. I've been with you through thick and thin. I didn't just discover Israel in the context of this campaign cycle. I was here 30 and 40 years ago before I was First Lady of Arkansas. I brought programs back that I saw. I saw then the kind of creativity, innovation that Israel provided in all sorts of fields, and brought those kinds of programs back to Arkansas and later on to the United States. And I see you as a partner and one of our most important allies, and we start to sort of continue the chapter from there. It's the one area where I think she has to be careful of not necessarily looking like she's disloyal or criticizing the president, but she can meaningfully show somewhat of a departure, or at least a different approach to the relationship than the president she served.
Thank you, Jay.
Well, again, I will start my prediction about Trump by saying I don't know, because he's proven to be very hard to predict. So here's where I come at it. I think that there are, he's given some weird signals about what he thinks the U.S. relationship should be with Israel, but on balance, where he seems to be landing now is, this is a good relationship, let's leave it alone. There are many people, both here and in the United States, who are strongly supporting Trump, who themselves are very pro-Israel, and who assure me, and would assure you if you ask them, that he is very pro-Israel, much more pro-Israel than Clinton. Okay, that's good to hear, I suppose. There's also the fact that the president does not act alone when it comes to the U.S.-Israel relationship in particular. Congress has a significant interest in the relationship, as it should, and it's a bipartisan issue in the Congress. It's the one issue around which most Democrats and Republicans will agree. In fact, they say that other than the State of the Union annual speech in Congress, the most widely attended congressional event is the AIPAC policy dinner. in Washington. So
Kosher food?
Not that it matters for Congress. It's the worst chicken you could ever taste. So, who like kosher? So there's that. Look, I mean, you know, I don't know what Trump would do, but I mean, I think that he doesn't labor under he doesn't inherit Obama's bad relationship with Netanyahu, and it is a bad relationship. Let's face it. He would probably be, I assume, he would be very skeptical of the value of continuing to invest in this agreement with Iran over its nuclear program. I think that he would certainly look for a way to get out of it. And luckily, well, not luckily, but unfortunately, the Iranian regime keeps giving us reasons to rethink whether this was a wise deal or not. Would he instinctively support Israel in any crisis, in any war that Israel suddenly found itself in? Probably. I mean, because, you know, what's the other side? You know, ISIS, Hezbollah, Hamas? I mean, he's not going to support any of those people. And so I think it's safe to say that he would probably check all the boxes on the things that are really, really important. Would he, however, create a room for Israel to advance geostrategically? That's a good question, because he doesn't seem to have an interest in those kinds of long diplomatic types of processes. And he may conclude, or he may be advised to conclude, that it's not worth his time. Which unfortunately is actually a pretty fair statement of where Obama is. It's not worth his time. Whether in Syria or in the Israel-Palestinian conflict, Obama has simply recognized that politically there's not a whole lot of value in it. And that may be a cynical view of looking at it, but I think that's where Trump would probably land.
So special relations stays?
Without a doubt.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
Right, so
Yeah.
we can sleep well tonight.
If Israelis are sleeping well, that makes me very happy.
This was my last question, and we will now open it for questions by you. I'll have to repeat the questions for the translation. Okay, so any questions? Yes, sir.
אני אומר את השאלה בעברית. אנחנו שמענו את הדעות של הקנדידטים השונים לגבי ארצות הברית ולגבי ישראל. נחמד לשמוע, אנחנו כאילו באותה רמה של חשיבות בינלאומית, אבל מה ההבדל בין שני הקנדידטים ביחסה של ארצות הברית לשני המתחרים הרציניים שלה, סין ורוסיה? אלה מרגישים שארצות הברית קצת נחלשת והם מנצלים את זה. יהיה צורך להגיב. האם יש הבדל בין שני הקנדידטים?
Okay, the question was, is there any difference in the two candidates' approach to China and Russia? And they will have to relate to this issue. How would they relate to these two challengers of the
Putin seems to be your man's running mate, so I'm not, you know.
Yeah, I mean, look, Trump has shown that he likes Putin. He admires Putin. I find that very troubling. But yeah, clearly Trump will want to be closer to Russia and work with Russia on issues of shared interest. I have no idea about China.
Does he know what China is?
Yeah.
I mean, very far.
Most of the things that he sells in his stores are made in China.
Exactly.
So of course he knows where China is. I don't know. You know, it seems to me he has a soft spot in his heart for authoritarians.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't seem to mind the idea that a government is centralized and controlling and can determine a lot of things all at once. So China would be somebody he would admire, okay. I guess.
On Hillary's side, I mean, again, you know, just looking at the kind of relationship that she had with Putin as Secretary of State, it wasn't warm and fuzzy. Hard to say, you know, what she would do would be hard to predict, but certainly a different kind of a relationship. Not a lot of trust there. Certainly no admiration, I suspect. I have no idea on China, really, just not an issue that I've ever sort of dealt with.
Okay.
I think it's quite symbolic that issues of political capture and maybe corruption have not come up until now, because it seems that they haven't come up as clearly as they probably should have in a campaign and would have been expected elsewhere. I mean, at least in Israel, in a political context like this, these issues would be thoroughly investigated, and it seems that hints that have been raised in the media have not received particular attention with regards to possibly both candidates, but possibly Hillary Clinton as a clearer focus of those type of claims. So I'm wondering, why is that correct, that perception that that's not a very interesting or salient issue in American politics? And if so, why is that the American public is not too concerned about politicians being captured by large interest groups and by big money, and being given, in certain cases, money into their, I don't know, individual pockets?
So I think it's actually, so the question is, you know, the issue of political capture and corruption, how come that hasn't received sufficient attention? I actually think it's received more attention than it deserves. In the case of Hillary, I mean, there have been more investigations about these emails. Even her primary candidate said, you know, enough of these damn emails. I don't want to hear about these emails. Let's discuss the real issues. You know, let's discuss security and economics and healthcare and all these other kinds of issues, instead of emails that have had, I don't know, 750 FBI agents combing through them for the last year and a half and turning up, you know, no criminal intent, et cetera, et cetera. You know, there have been investigations about that. There have been efforts to talk about the kind of support that Hillary Clinton has received from Wall Street. By the way, nothing illegal. You can receive, you know, as a speaker, you can receive funding. There's tremendous transparency in the American system. You know, the question, of course, that was suggested is, can you receive large sums of money from Wall Street and still regulate Wall Street with any degree of independence? Well, you know, I think you can. As someone who's, again, run for office, I think it's very clear to most donors, and we're not talking about donors necessarily, although there is donor money from Wall Street to campaigns, which, again, on an individual basis, is absolutely legal. It's an extremely transparent system. There are limits, you know, to what any one particular candidate can receive from any one individual. It's all reported. It's all online. So these are things that are, you know, no mystery. But as a candidate running for office, you have to be able to take money from people and still say no to them. I mean, you can listen to them. They can approach you. They may have access. But in my experience, a lot of people have access to politicians, and it's not necessarily based on contributions they've made. It's more relationship-based, but the money doesn't guarantee you, first of all, neither the access, nor does it guarantee you a particular vote in any particular, you know, way, shape, or form. I don't think there's anyone out there who could convince us that Hillary Clinton, during her time in the Senate, voted one way or another because of campaign contributions. And in fact, she's taken a fairly tough line on regulating banks and so forth. Perhaps not as tough as Bernie Sanders and some of the folks on the left side of the party have wanted, but she's been engaged on that issue. So I think there's been even too much focus on some of those issues.
Well, I mean, without question, the whole campaign of Donald Trump rests on your premise, which is that there's too much money in American politics. There's too many special interests controlling the politicians. The politicians are afraid to do anything that would actually help all ordinary Americans. Whether any of these things is true or not doesn't matter. It's what a majority of Americans think. And especially if you think those things, you're very, very likely to be a supporter of Trump or Bernie Sanders. And one thing you're definitely not warm about is Hillary Clinton. Whether it's factual or not, and I think it's actually somewhat factual, that you know, the Clinton Global Foundation had this sort of, it looked like a receiving mechanism for cash for the Clinton family empire, and one of the benefits was that the donors could receive preferential access to the Secretary of State. Didn't necessarily have the full-on corruption thing, but it looked like it. It smells bad. And it smells bad. I mean, and by the way, the first and most compelling accusations about this came from the Sanders campaign. Yeah, there was the Wall Street thing too. Look, the problem is this, is that the Republicans can easily be accused of the same things. And by the way, Donald Trump can be accused of some of the very, very same things. But he has somehow turned the issue against her quite effectively. And whether it's fair or not, whether it's accurate or not, is almost immaterial. You know, when in American politics, as in politics anywhere, perception becomes reality. And the perception is that Donald Trump somehow is beyond corruption, beyond the reach of special interests. And what's amazing about that is that he is able to hammer that point home by showing that he doesn't care what people think. Now, it's just because he says something that's outrageous doesn't mean that he won't do the bidding of a special interest. Those two things don't matter. But he creates this perception because he appears not to care what people think about him.
And let's remember that he's contributed to many of the candidates
Yeah.
now attacks, including the Clintons.
Yeah.
And let's also remember that the same organization, the Clinton Foundation, which you've raised issues about, has been given, you know, A+ ratings by numerous organizations that are completely impartial and that have reaffirmed that not only have they done what the charter set out to do, but they've done so in an extraordinary way compared to, you know, the foundations of Mr. Trump or others. Oh, this is upsetting you. Come on, Grumpy. You know it's true.
I'm just saying. Shorthand for I disagree.
How do you
I
translate that into Hebrew? That's the problem. Okay.
Any other question? Yes, please.
אנחנו יודעים שטראמפ הוא לא בשר מבשרה של המפלגה הרפובליקנית. במהלך כל התקופה, גם בתקופה שהוא של הפריימריז וגם עכשיו, הוא מציג בעצם עמדות עצמאיות, והוא למעשה מועמד עצמאי. זה שהוא מטעם המפלגה הרפובליקנית זה רק מקרי. האם, אם הוא יהיה נשיא ארצות הברית, מה היו היחסים שלו עם הקונגרס, והאם הוא יכול להסתמך על הרוב הרפובליקני שיש לו, כי עובדה שאפילו המנהיגות הרפובליקנית בקושי תמכה.
The question was, Trump is not an integral part of the Republican Party. To which extent is he really an independent candidate? And if this is the case, what would be his relationship with the Republicans in the Congress and so on?
It's an excellent question. Very good question. I wish I understood it in the original language. I think the question is the answer. It's to say that he will stand apart from the. Okay, so this is actually true whether he wins or he loses. But let's talk about if he wins. If he wins, the Republicans in Congress will want to do things with him on certain issues. But he will also look to pick fights. Remember what I said about how he'll pick fights with small, little, insignificant foreign entities. I think he'll do that too with Republicans in Congress. He'll always want to be uncontrollable, and because it's valuable to him to always be his own man. And he'll walk away from deals that everyone negotiates, you know, whether it's about saving Social Security or healthcare. He'll blow it up at the last minute because that's what he does. So I think that there's going to be that. If he loses, could be the same situation, just he won't be president, but he may say, you know what, I'm going to continue what I'm doing, I'm going to keep talking about these issues, and I'm going to start a network, a media empire. It's going to be called Trump TV. And he's got people who already know how to do this. Roger Ailes, who formed Fox News, is advising him. He's got, you know, a significant number of very media-savvy advisors. And it could be very easy for him to continue to be a force. And if he's a force, he's not just going to be critical of Hillary, President Clinton, he would be critical of the Republicans who remain in Congress. And it would be very hard for them.
Oh, I think that's his first target. Really, I mean, much more so than Hillary Clinton. It would be Republicans. I disagree.
Wow.
Last question, anyone? Yes, please.
There are many people like you, the Republican side of the table, who are not quite in love with their candidates. Do you think that these people will vote? And the same goes actually for Mrs. Clinton, who are so many Democrats who are not exactly enthusiastic about her.
So yeah, I mean, you know, there are a core group of Democrats, I'm among them, who really passionately believe in her candidacy and support her and are delighted to go out there and, you know, knock on doors and do all they can, and will vote for her on election day. Just like I think Mr. Trump, again, it may be a different group than your traditional Republican voters, but he does have a seemingly loyal group of base supporters that are really willing to go to the mat for him. Then you have this much larger group in both parties, I think, that are just so intent on making sure that the other guy or the other girl, you know, the other woman doesn't get in. So perhaps not everyone in the party is enamored with Hillary, but they sure as hell want to make sure that Trump doesn't become president. I mean, that's essentially what Bernie Sanders' message is to his supporters. You know, you're disappointed. I didn't get there. I know you have issues with Hillary on policy, on substance, on style, whatever it may be, but if it's not her, then it's him. Now, for some of those people, they may say, you know what, let's burn down the house and start anew. I'd rather have him than her. I don't think the majority of Democrats are going to feel that way, but remember, Bernie's not a Democrat either, right? He's about as independent as Trump is on the Republican side. He joined the party to run, right? So, and I think, in a sense, we're much more unified than the Republicans are. I mean, they've really taken an internal beating. There are not just splits between one wing and another wing of the Republican Party. There are many sort of fissures within. And so, you know, there is an enthusiasm for the candidates, but there's also a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for defeating the other candidate as well.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that a certain percentage of Republicans hate more than Donald Trump is Hillary Clinton. And so I suspect that at the end, when it's time to vote, especially if they live in a state where their vote is going to matter, they'll hold their nose and vote for Trump. That is what, you know, a campaign does. It forces people, it's like a polarizing, it forces people to one side or the other. They can't stay in the middle. I happen to be one of the few people I know who's just equally critical of both the major party candidates. And so, you know, the question though is the intensity of support for Trump and the intensity of anger or hatred of Hillary enough? Intensity is something that Obama really was able to tap into. He didn't run for the middle voters, those swing voters, as much as he ran for voters who already should have been voting for him, you know, and because he focused very much on what they call the base, and by the way, Bush did this too, because he focused on the base, he turned out more voters than trying to fight for those very few people in the middle. I suspect that both candidates are going to do that, and what they're going to do is they're going to tap into emotional appeal. They're going to try to make people afraid. In the case of Hillary, they're going to say, you can't elect him because he's irrational and he's going to lead us into war. The most effective speech that she gave was the one where she said that, and the foreign policy speech. Right. Trump, on his part, is going to say, you can't vote for her because, well, now she's going to say one of two things. He's going to say because she's too old and frail, but more likely they're going to say because she's going to do things that will really offend you and hurt you. He'll tap into anger, different from fear.
So really becomes an issue now of mobilization. There's persuading swing voters, which we talked about early on, but at some point that shifts to mobilization. Great, African Americans are supporting me, let's make sure we get more African Americans than are currently supporting me. How do you bring these people, how do you motivate them to get out and go to the polls? And in that sense, again, Democrats, at least the last 2 or 3 election cycles, have a better ground game, generally speaking, than Republicans.
Very much so, yeah.
And so that should give Hillary a natural advantage going into the final stretch of this campaign. And the very fact that he's running a non-traditional campaign when it comes to the mechanics of the campaign, not just what he says, where he spends his money, what kind of campaign team he has, what states he's visiting in the final few weeks of this campaign. You know, it's anyone's guess. Does he even have a functioning GOTV apparatus? I suspect he does, but how effective is it? You know.
Yeah, it's so interesting how you can imagine how he can sit there and say in the last 60 days of this campaign, when Hillary and her supporters, mostly her supporters, try to generate enthusiasm among the Democrats by saying he's a racist, he's a misogynist, he's a fearmonger, he's an anti-Semite. They'll say all these things. And all he needs to do is two things. He needs to say, look, they've been saying this about me forever. That's what they do. They're trying to make you think things about me which are not true. And because Trump seems to have, like, he's covered with, like, this sort of Teflon, you know, everything just slides off of him. That will
I think it's slang. Yeah.
Maybe. But the other thing is all he has to do is say, look, they always say that. They always say that about people they disagree with. And by the way, there's some truth to that. But the other thing he'll do is all he has to do is appear to be a gentleman, sane, rational, reasoned, centered. He doesn't have to be crazy Don Trump anymore. He can be Donald Trump. And what will happen is people, this is the scenario, this is something that, you know, if you're not a big Donald Trump fan, you should be afraid of, is he will convince people that what they've been saying about Donald Trump all this time was wrong. And they're going to say, look, this guy seems normal. And that could be enough to win the election.
I think you and I can take a bet right now on whether or not he's going to appear normal by the end of this campaign cycle.
If you take his hair out of the picture.
Stop right there.
All right, we're gonna see them. All right.
Now it's 7:30, time to go home and have dinner. Please enjoy one of the best restaurants in Tel Aviv.
We have been.
Okay.
Absolutely, that's
November 9th.
an easy thing.
You can apply for Aliyah's papers at the Israeli embassy.
No.
Wherever.
I stay in
or
America.
just come for visit. West Bank is waiting. Thank you all for coming. תודה רבה לכם. ערב טוב.
Thank you.